Daniel Reed had traveled through many strange places in the Orion sector. He had seen cities floating on oceans of light and mountains that sang when the wind passed over them. Yet, when he received a sealed invitation from the royal family of Zereth Prime, it felt different. The message was written on silver paper that shimmered like water. The words were formal. You are invited to attend the grand wedding at the Palace of the Sun. Daniel thought it was a rare honor, a cultural exchange between the humans of Earth and the proud alien monarchy of Zereth Prime. He had heard the stories. The palace was a wonder of the galaxy. The people of Zereth were known for their ancient traditions and their unmatched beauty. For Daniel, it sounded like an adventure. The journey took him 3 days by starship. As his vessel descended toward the planet, he saw a sky of deep blue and golden clouds. Great towers rose from the surface like spears of light, each tipped with crystal spires that caught the sun and scattered it into 1,000 colors. Wide rivers of silver water cut through green plains, and huge banners of royal blue waved in. The wind, a grand escort of silver-armored guards, met him at the spaceport. Their armor shone so brightly that it was almost blinding. They stood tall and moved with precise, perfect steps. Without a word, they guided him toward a long open-air carriage pulled by 6 creatures that looked like white-scaled horses with golden eyes. Daniel sat inside, feeling both impressed and slightly nervous. The ride took him through the capital. Alien citizens lined the streets, their eyes following him. Some smiled politely, but many only stared in silence. Daniel wondered if they had seen a human before. As they entered the palace gates, the sense of grandeur grew stronger. The Palace of the Sun was massive. Its walls were made of polished gold that reflected the light of the twin suns above. The gates were carved with scenes of battles, coronations, and weddings that must have taken place over thousands of years. Tall guards stood on each side, holding long spears tipped with glowing blue blades. Inside the gates, the gardens stretched in all directions. Giant flowers, with silver petals opened and closed, as if they were breathing. Fountains sprayed sparkling water into the air, and small winged creatures darted between the leaves. Daniel could hear soft music coming from somewhere ahead. It was slow and deep, like the beating of a giant heart. As he stepped into the main courtyard, he felt dozens of eyes on him. Alien guests in elegant robes of silk-like fabric turned to watch. Their clothing shimmered under the sunlight. Some were holding crystal cups. Others carried fans made of glowing feathers. The air smelled of sweet spices and something sharp, almost metallic. Daniel smiled politely, trying not to feel out of place. He was here as a guest, after all. Yet he noticed the way they whispered to one another as he passed. A few of them tilted their heads, as if judging him. A young alien girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed at him, wide-eyed. He was about to ask one of the guards about the stairs when a figure stepped out from behind a column. It was an old alien servant. His back was slightly bent, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. His eyes were deep green and sharp, as if they could see through Daniel's very thoughts. The old servant moved closer. His voice was quiet, but each word carried weight. You do not know why you are truly here, human. Daniel blinked. I was invited to the wedding. That's all I know. The servant gave him a long, unreadable look. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Daniel stood there for a moment, unsettled. What had the old man meant? Surely this was just a misunderstanding. But the unease in his stomach did not fade. The guards continued to guide him deeper into the palace. The corridors were lined with tall pillars carved into the shapes of ancient kings and queens. Stained glass windows cast patterns of red, gold, and blue across the floor. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, as if the sound itself was being swallowed by the walls. Finally, they reached a vast hall. Golden chandeliers hung from the high ceiling. The floor was made of polished crystal. so clear it reflected everything like a mirror. Long tables stretched across the hall, covered with plates of exotic food and cups of glowing drink. Daniel took a step forward, but before he could look around, the music stopped. The sudden silence was heavy. Every guest turned toward the far end of the hall. Daniel followed their gaze. At the top of a wide staircase stood the king of Zereth Prime. His robe was black, trimmed with gold, and his crown looked as if it was made from the sun itself. His eyes glowed faintly, like molten gold. He held a staff tipped with a large red gem that pulsed with light. The king's gaze locked on Daniel. It was not hostile, but it was deep, as if he was looking into the core of Daniel's soul. In that moment, Daniel felt as if the entire palace had closed in around him. The whispering guests, the strange warning from the old servant, the stares in the street. All of it suddenly felt connected, though he could not yet understand how. He had come as a guest to watch a wedding, but now, as the king took a slow step down the staircase, Daniel began to wonder if he had walked into something far bigger than he had imagined. The king's footsteps echoed through the hall. Each step sounded like it carried centuries of power. The guests bowed their heads as he passed. The air felt heavy, almost sacred. Daniel stood frozen, unsure if he should bow or salute. The king stopped only a few feet away. He studied Daniel for a long moment, his golden eyes glowing faintly. Then he smiled. It was a calm smile, but it carried something Daniel could not name. "Welcome, Daniel Reed of Earth," the king said in a deep voice. "Your presence here honors us." Daniel bowed slightly. "It is my honor, Your Majesty. I am grateful for the invitation." The king nodded, then gestured toward a raised table near the front. "Come, the feast is prepared." Two guards guided Daniel to a seat, beside a long row of alien nobles. Their robes shimmered in strange patterns that seemed to move on their own. Platters of food were placed in front of them, meats from unknown creatures, fruits that glowed softly, and drinks that shimmered like liquid starlight. Daniel tried to relax. He thought perhaps the earlier tension had been his imagination. He picked up a golden goblet and took a careful sip. It tasted sweet at first, then warmed his throat like fire. The music started again, soft and graceful. Then a voice called from the far side of the hall. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Serenia of Zereth Prime." Every guest stood. Daniel quickly followed their example. She entered with slow, graceful steps. Her gown flowed like silver water, and her hair was dark as midnight, with threads of gold woven through. Her skin held a faint glow under the lights, and her eyes were a bright, deep violet. Daniel felt the air shift around him. Even among such a majestic crowd, she seemed to shine, more brightly than anyone else. The princess looked directly at him as she approached. For a brief moment, he thought he saw recognition in her eyes. It was strange. He had never met her before. She stopped beside the king and bowed her head respectfully. Then, with a slight smile, she stepped toward Daniel. A servant carried a golden chain with a pendant shaped like a star. Serenia lifted it gently and placed it around his neck. Daniel blinked. "Thank you," he said quietly. Whispers moved through the crowd. Some guests smiled, others looked surprised. Daniel heard a voice behind him whisper to another, "The binding has begun." He turned his head slightly. "The binding?" he asked. But the nobles near him only smiled politely and looked away. The king stood, raising a crystal goblet high in the air. "Tonight, two worlds will unite forever," he declared. His voice carried through every corner of the hall. The guests cheered. The music grew louder. Servants moved quickly, pouring more drinks and bringing new dishes. Daniel clapped politely with the others, still confused. The phrase "two worlds will unite" echoed in his head. He had thought this wedding was between two alien royal families. Was the human delegation part of some larger alliance? He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the old servant from earlier, the one who had warned him. The servant leaned close, his voice barely more than a whisper. It has already begun, human. You are in the center of it. Before Daniel could ask what he meant, the servant was gone again, moving through the crowd like a shadow. The king spoke. Once more, let the ceremony begin. Daniel looked toward the far end of the hall. A wide door was opening, and a group of priests in long blue robes entered, carrying glowing orbs. The lights in the hall dimmed, and the orbs cast moving patterns of light across the walls. The music changed. Deep drums began to beat in a slow rhythm. Horns sounded in a low, haunting tone. The guests grew silent. One of the priests motioned for Daniel to step forward. He looked at the guards for guidance, but they simply nodded toward the center of the hall. Serenia stepped forward as well, her violet eyes calm but unreadable. Daniel's heart began to beat faster. He had no idea what this ceremony was, but every instinct told him it was not simply a wedding for someone else. And as he walked into the center, the crowd's eyes followed his every move. The hall grew darker as the priests moved into a wide circle. Their blue robes shimmered under the light of the glowing orbs they carried. The patterns of light shifted across the walls like waves on water. Daniel stood in the center beside Princess Serenia. He tried to speak to her, but the drums grew louder, drowning out his words. She looked straight ahead, her face calm, almost regal. A high priest stepped forward. His robe was darker than the others, lined with silver symbols. He carried a staff topped with a crystal sphere that pulsed with soft white light. When he spoke, his voice carried a deep, steady rhythm, each word flowing like part of the music. Daniel could not understand the alien language. Still, he caught his own name among the words. His pulse quickened. The crowd watched in complete silence. 2 guards stepped closer, not in a threatening way, but as if to make sure he stayed where he was. Daniel tried to tell himself this was just part of the culture, some ceremonial role for an honored guest. Yet something in the air felt heavier now, as if the very room was holding its breath. The high priest lifted his staff. A beam of light shot from the crystal at the tip and wrapped around Daniel and Serenia, like a ribbon made of pure energy. It floated around them, shifting from white to gold, then to deep red. Daniel's eyes widened. "What is this?" he asked, turning slightly toward the guards. They said nothing. The ribbon of light began to tighten, circling them both closer together. Serenia finally looked into his eyes. There was no fear in hers, only something he could not read, perhaps sadness, perhaps acceptance. The high priest spoke again. This time, the words were slower, more deliberate. Daniel heard the word binding repeated several times. The crowd began to hum softly in rhythm with the drums. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at Serenia again. "Princess, what is happening?" Her lips moved slightly. "You will understand soon." The ribbon of light shifted to a bright gold, and then slowly faded until it vanished. The drums stopped. The humming ended. For a heartbeat, the hall was completely silent. Then the king's voice filled the air. "It is done." The crowd erupted into cheers. Some clapped their hands. Others raised their goblets high. A few wiped their eyes, as if this was a moment of great joy. Daniel stood still, not sharing their excitement. He felt the weight of a decision he had not made, pressing down on him. The words of the old servant returned to his mind. "You do not know why you are truly here." The high priest bowed to the king, then to Serenia, and finally to Daniel. He stepped back into the circle, and the priests carried their glowing orbs away. Slowly, the normal lights of the hall returned. Serenia stepped closer to Daniel. Her voice was low so that only he could hear. "From this moment, our lives are joined." Daniel's throat felt dry. "Joined how?" She gave a small, almost sad smile. "In the eyes of my people, you are now my husband." His breath caught. "What?" Before she could explain further, the king raised his hands for silence. "Let the celebrations begin," he declared. Music burst into life again, brighter and faster than before. Servants rushed forward with trays of food and drink. Guests moved toward the dance floor. Laughter filled the air. Daniel, however, could not share in the joy. The words "You are now my husband" echoed in his mind. He had come here to attend a wedding, not to be part of one. Yet every detail, the chain around his neck, the ribbon of light, the king's speech now made a strange kind of sense. This had been the plan from the beginning, as the hall filled with music and cheers. Daniel stood in the center, trying to understand the trap he had just walked into, and from somewhere in the crowd, hidden behind smiling faces, the old servant was watching him again. The celebration in the royal hall went on for hours. Music filled the air, bright and full of life, yet Daniel could not hear it the same way the others did. Every cheer, every laugh, every smile around him felt like a wall closing in. Serenia stayed close to him, greeting nobles and foreign dignitaries, but she spoke little. The chain she had placed around his neck felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of something far greater than a welcome gift. When the crowd became distracted by a grand display of dancers in glowing costumes, Serenia touched his arm. "Come with me." She led him through a side door, away from the noise and light. The halls beyond were quiet, lit only by the soft glow of crystal lamps. Their footsteps echoed against the polished stone floors. They stopped in a private balcony, garden high above the city. The twin suns of Zereth were sinking toward the horizon, casting gold and red light across the skyline. The wind was cool and carried the scent of the silver flowers blooming in the garden. Daniel turned to face her. "I think I deserve to know what is going on." Serenia met his eyes without hesitation. "You do, and I will tell you everything." She stepped closer, her voice lower now. "Years ago, when I was still a child, raiders attacked our diplomatic envoy in the neutral zone. I was injured. I would have died if a human ship had not arrived in time. Its captain and crew fought the raiders and saved us. You were among them." Daniel frowned. "I was part of a rescue mission once, but I didn't know it was me," she said. "You saved my life, and by our laws, such a debt cannot remain unpaid." Daniel shook his head. "That was years ago. I never expected anything in return. But my people see things differently," she replied. "In our traditions, saving the life of a royal means your fate becomes tied to theirs. It is rare, and it is sacred. The king, my father, decided that the best way to honor this bond and to protect our world was to make you my husband." Daniel took a step back. "Protect your world? From what?" Her voice grew heavier. "A rival empire stands at our border. They want to force me into marriage with one of their warlords to claim our resources. But if I am already married to you, a human of Earth, they cannot do so without declaring war on the entire Orion Alliance. They will not risk that. You are our shield." Daniel felt the wind grow colder. So, this wedding, it was never about love or celebration. It was about politics, about survival. Serenia's eyes softened. "It was both. For my people, it is survival. For me, perhaps it can be something more, in time." He looked away, staring at the alien skyline. "You should have told me before." "I could not," she said. "The rival empire has spies even in this palace. If they knew you were the chosen one, they would have struck before the ceremony. This was the only way to keep you alive." Daniel turned back to her. "And what if I refuse? What if I leave?" Her voice grew quiet. "Then my people will be left without protection, and the warlord will come for me, and my world will burn." They stood in silence for a moment. The suns dipped lower, painting the horizon in deep crimson. Serenia stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. "I know this is not what you wanted, but the stars put you here for a reason. You have the courage of a soldier and the heart of a protector. I saw that years ago, and I see it now." Daniel looked into her violet eyes. For the first time, He saw something beyond the royal duty and the political games. He saw a woman caught between love for her people and the weight of her crown. He still did not have an answer, but deep inside, a part of him already knew he would not walk away. From the shadows beyond the balcony, unseen by them both, the old servant watched once more. His face was unreadable, but his eyes seemed to know the path that Daniel was beginning to walk. The next morning, the palace felt different. The music and laughter from the wedding feast were gone. In their place was the steady movement of soldiers and the quiet hum of urgent voices. Daniel walked through the grand corridors, the golden walls reflecting his figure back at him. The chain Saranya had placed around his neck was still there. It felt heavier than ever. In the royal strategy chamber, a large map was spread across a glowing table. Tiny ships moved on the display, representing fleets across the border. The king stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the edge. Saranya was beside him, her face calm but tense. Generals in dark armor surrounded them, speaking in low tones. When Daniel entered, the room fell silent for a moment. All eyes turned toward him. The king gestured for him to step closer. "Daniel Reed, you are now part of this house. You have a right to know what we face." Daniel approached the table. The map shifted to show the rival empire's fleet, positioned dangerously close to Zereth Prime. Red markers blinked along the border. "They are moving warships into attack range," the king said, "but they will not strike while you are here. As the husband of my daughter, you are under the protection of the Orion Alliance. If they attack, they will be at war with every human fleet in the sector." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So I'm not just a husband. I'm a shield." The king's golden eyes narrowed. "You are more than that. You are a symbol. They will test you. They may try to remove you quietly, to weaken us before they strike." A general stepped forward. "We believe assassins are already on Zereth Prime. Our scouts found signs near the outer gates last night." Saranya looked at Daniel. Her voice was calm but carried a warning. "You cannot walk the city alone now, and you cannot return to Earth. Not yet. If you leave, the protection ends, and my people will be open to attack." Daniel felt the walls closing in again. He had never wanted to be a political figure. He was an explorer, not a ruler. Yet walking away would mean letting millions of people face war and destruction. He turned to Sir. "And what happens if I stay? I live in a palace and pretend to be a king." She stepped closer. "No. You live as someone who chooses to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You already did it once, when you saved me. This is only the same choice, on a much greater scale." Her words stayed with him for the rest of the day. He tried to rest in his chamber, but his mind would not settle. He walked the balcony outside his room, looking out over the city. The streets below were busy with markets and bright banners. Children ran between stalls, laughing. Merchants shouted their prices. Life went on as if war was not sitting at their border. He realized that these were the lives his presence was protecting. Ordinary people who had no idea what deals were made in the shadows to keep them safe. Night came quickly. The twin moons of Zereth Prime rose high, casting silver light across the palace grounds. Daniel was about to turn in when he heard its footsteps outside his chamber door. He froze. The sound was slow and careful, not the confident walk of a guard. He reached for a ceremonial sword mounted on the wall. The polished blade felt cold in his hands. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door creaked open. A dark figure slipped inside, moving low and fast. The glint of a blade caught the moonlight. Daniel stepped back, raising his sword. His heart pounded, but his grip was steady. The figure lunged. Before the strike could land, another shadow moved in from the side. A blade flashed, and the attacker's weapon fell to the floor. The palace guards swarmed in, pulling the would-be assassin to the ground. One of the guards looked at Daniel. "You see now, human, the war has already begun." It has simply not been declared yet. Daniel's breath slowed, but the weight in his chest grew heavier. This was no longer only politics. It was survival. And he was now a target. From somewhere deeper in the palace, Saranya's voice called his name. The assassin's capture should have brought a night of caution and quiet. But the palace would not have such peace. It began with a sound deep in the walls. A low rumble, like thunder trapped underground. The lamps in the hall flickered. Then, the first explosion shook the eastern wing. The golden panels of Daniel's chamber rattled. Guards shouted from the corridors. Another blast lit the horizon outside his balcony, sending smoke rising into the night sky. The door to his room burst open, and Serenia rushed in, dressed in light battle armor that shimmered under the moonlight. In her hands was a curved blade, the metal alive with a faint blue glow. "They are inside the palace," she said sharply. "Come with me." Daniel grabbed the sword he had taken earlier. The weight felt natural in his hands now. He followed her through the corridor as shouts and steel clashed ahead, the air filled with smoke. Two guards fell back, toward them, blades locked with tall alien attackers in black armor. The invaders' helmets hid their faces, but their movements were quick and precise. Serenia did not hesitate. She stepped forward, her blade spinning in a bright arc. One attacker fell, the other stumbled back. Daniel moved in to cover her side, blocking a strike meant for her back. They fought together without speaking, each movement flowing into the next. Serenia's strikes were fast and clean. Daniel's blocks and counters kept their enemies from surrounding them. The attackers pressed hard. One lunged at Daniel, their blades sliding against his. The impact drove him back, but he held his ground. With a sudden twist, he disarmed the attacker and struck with the hilt of his sword, sending them crashing to the floor. Serenia moved past him, pushing toward the grand hall. "We have to reach my father. They will try to take him first." As they ran, more explosions rocked the palace. Sections of the golden ceiling cracked, raining dust and debris. Guards fought in the shadows of the pillars, holding the line against waves of black-armored figures dot in the grand hall. Chaos reigned. The king stood at the top of the steps, his golden crown glinting in the light of the fires outside. Around him, loyal soldiers formed a protective wall, but the enemy was pressing in. Daniel and Serenia charged into the fight. He blocked a blade, aimed at a guard's neck. She cut down an attacker who had broken through the line. The battle was fierce and close. Sparks flew as steel met steel. The shouts of warriors mixed with the deep drumbeat of the enemy's war horns outside. An enemy soldier broke past the guards and rushed toward the king. Serenia saw it first. Without thinking, she threw herself in front of her father. The attacker's blade struck her armor, the blow glancing off, but the force knocked her to one knee. Daniel was there in an instant, his sword slamming against the attacker's weapon. They locked blades, strength straining against strength. With a surge of effort, Daniel drove his sword upward, sending the enemy's weapon flying. He struck again, and the attacker fell. Serenia looked up at him. For a brief moment, the noise of the hall faded. Her voice was soft. "You are my husband now, not only in the eyes of my people, but in my heart." Daniel felt something shift inside him. He had come here as a guest, dragged into a duty he had never asked for. Yet in this moment, standing over her, the choice to protect her and her people was his own. The attackers began to retreat. Outside, the sound of enemy horns faded into the distance. The guards closed the gates and tended to the wounded. The king descended the steps, his golden eyes fixed on Daniel. "Tonight you stood as one of us," he said. "And because of that, we still stand." Daniel lowered his sword. His arm ached, but his resolve was stronger than it had ever been. Somewhere deep in his mind, the thought formed clearly for the first time. "I am not leaving this world to face this fight alone." The fires in the palace had been put out. but the smell of smoke still clung to the air. Guards stood on high alert along the golden walls, their armor marked by the night's battle. Daniel stood on the royal balcony, looking out at the city. The twin moons hung over the horizon, casting a silver glow across the rooftops. Below, the streets were alive with movement, as citizens helped each other rebuild the damage left by the attack. Serenia stepped beside him, her armor now replaced by a flowing white robe lined with gold. She carried 2 goblets of a warm, spiced drink. She handed him one without a word. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the lights of the city. "It is strange," Daniel said finally. "Yesterday, I thought I was only visiting. Now it feels like this place has always been mine to protect." Serenia smiled faintly. "Because it has. You just didn't know it yet." He turned to her. "And you? Did you want this? Not for politics. Not for the safety of your people. But for yourself." She met his gaze. "When I was a child, I saw you fight to save lives you did not even know. Tonight, I saw you do it again. That is the kind of man I would choose, even if there were no throne, no crown, no war." Daniel looked back toward the city. The thought of leaving now felt impossible. "Then I choose to stay. Not because of duty, not because of politics, but because of you. And because this world deserves someone who will fight for it." From behind them, the king's voice carried across the balcony. "Then you are truly one of us, Daniel Reed of Earth." Daniel turned to face him. The king was no longer wearing his crown. Instead, he carried a ceremonial cloak woven with the colors of Zirith, prime deep blue and gold. He placed it over Daniel's shoulders. "This marks you not as a guest," the king said, "but as a guardian of this realm. From this day forward, your name will stand in our history." Below in the city, a cheer rose from the crowd as the royal banners were lifted high. Ships flew overhead in perfect formation, their lights flashing in salute. The sound of their engines rolled across the sky like thunder. Serenia took Daniel's hand. "Our journey will not be easy. The rival empire will try again, but we will face it together." He squeezed her hand, then let them come. The two of them stood side by side at the edge of the balcony, watching the ships pass above and the people cheer below. The stars beyond the twin moons shone brighter than ever. Daniel had come to Zirith Prime as a visitor, an outsider, with no place in the royal court. But now he was something far greater, a protector, a husband, a part of a world that had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. And in the quiet strength of that moment, with the night sky stretching endlessly above, Daniel knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.